Reynolds are first recorded as living here from about the 1820s. Michael Reynolds, who came from a village called Lisseagan in a place called Askra, he lived there with his family. He had two brothers. One came to Walshtown himself, another one went to Aircourt, and one stayed in Lisseagan. And he came here and he married a lady called Delia Murray, who came from a place called Lishina Hevna. So they had a number of children. They had Joseph, they had Michael, who went to the US, I believe to Salt Lake City, and never came back. They had Anne, who married a man called Joseph Conway and lived in a place called Callahan. So Joseph married a lady called Margaret Horan, whose father, James Horan, and mother, Mary Reynolds. James Horan originally came from a place called Englishtown, which is, we'll pass that shortly, and he then settled in Coxtown. He had a farm, and he apparently had a fair bit of land, according to the Griffiths valuation of the 1850s, and they had a number of children. Margaret came to live here. The house that they lived in, I believe, was a different house to this house. This house was built a little bit later. So Michael Reynolds was a herd for the local landlord, and then his son Joseph Reynolds became a herd. Joseph died on the 17th of March 1887 from TB after being ill for a number of years. He left his wife, who was a shepherdess, so they had a lot of sheep, and a family that were quite young. The oldest was Delia, who is Brian's great-grandmother. The second one was Michael, then there was James, then there was Joseph, then there was Mary, and then there was Malachi. And so, from my understanding, the family were quite poor and struggled a fair bit at that point. I should say that further back, during the time of the famine, Michael was living here with his wife Delia Murray, and they had enough funds to be able to, at the end of the road there, they'd make up porridge and they'd leave food out for people who were less fortunate than them. But the death of Joseph had an impact on the family. So Delia went to America, then James went to America. Michael stayed at home, Joseph stayed at home, Malachi was a bit younger. He went to America for 2 weeks but didn't like it, so he came home. And sadly, the three brothers died in very quick succession. So 2 brothers died in 1905, and then Malachi died in 1908. Their mother died in 1906. And I was thinking when we were planning the reunion and in the period leading up to meeting Brian, how sad it would have been for Delia, because she had twin daughters in April 1906, then her mother died in June 1906, and then one of her twin daughters died in September 1906, and then her brother died in 1908, and then obviously her 2 other brothers had died. So she would have seen at a distance a lot of tragedy, and that kind of led to, on James, or Jim as he was known, and his wife Margaret Gilmore, who he met in New York, and to come back in order for Mary to go to New York, because she'd obviously been here all through that period when all the people died and wanted, I guess, just to be away from it. So they came back, and then they had their 5 sons. They had Joseph, Malachi, Thomas, James and John, and I think in about the about 1915, 1914, James actually bought the freehold of Walshtown. He was able to do that, and then he farmed here. He farmed the fields over to the left of us, and also there was a long garden, and where the other house there is now, that was all part of the Reynolds field, and where the cows are behind us, that was also the part of the Reynolds homestead. Thomas, who was the middle son, he also got TB, and he died in 1942. So at this point, Joseph was in New York, Malachi was in London. Malachi went on to emigrate to New Zealand. Tommy was a carpenter, he also helped out on the farm. when he died, my dad was in the army, and my dad would get permission from the army at Grandad's request to come home and farm the land. And Mary's father, Jimmy, was at the Irish College in Rome. He was training to be a priest.
Yes.
And then he then decided to go down a different path and use his degree in a very...
Why I'm here, Brian.
Yes.
I nearly wasn't here, you know.
Yes.
But to use his degree in a very effective way, with, was it the Land Commission? Or
Department of Agriculture.
Department of Agriculture. So then my dad lived here. My dad actually got TB as well and nearly died and had surgery that essentially saved his life. But that broke his spirit, and then in a moment of madness he decided to sell the place. That's probably the best thing to say.
Can I just say one thing though that I remember, because Granny was here on her own then, you know. When
Yeah, she was on her own. Yeah, my dad went, yes.
Yeah, eventually she came to live with us, but I always remember my father talking about it was a house where there was always visitors and music. And I actually have met people in my own life down the road, and they told me that they used to go to Reynolds, because Tommy was very good in the accordion.
He was.
Mike McCaig and was it Michael McCaig? No, Patsy McCaig. And those used to come here, and there was kind of an open house, and they would play music, and it was always known as that type of place.
Yes, and when...
It wasn't all sadness.
Oh gosh, no. When Margaret came back from New York with her husband Jim, apparently the front, from what my dad told me that he had been informed by his mother, there was cow dung outside the front of the house, and it was very, in very poor state of repair. So she decided to plant a flower garden, a rose garden, and the smell of roses apparently used to drift into the house, and all the neighbours apparently weren't too impressed at that. They thought she should be planting vegetables. It's obviously a very sacred place for the Reynolds family. People lived here for nearly 150 years. Jarlath played here as a young child. He left here when he was 2. And Granny, as Mary said, she made it her own. She was a very welcoming, warm lady and loved to cook. And if a neighbour came by and she didn't have any food, she'd just rustle up a pancake and make them welcome. And that's the thing to remember, even though it's obviously now a place where there's no one living here. It was very much even in spite of all that sadness, there was a lot of life here. And I like to think of all the boys running around playing and having fun, because I'm sure they did have a lot of fun when they were children here.